At 07:30 on September 18, 1944, Private First Class Arthur Jackson pressed himself against a coral outcrop on Peleliu, watching Japanese machine gun fire tear into the Marines to his left. 19 years old, 3 days on this island. 0 confirmed kills. What happened over the next 90 minutes would make him one of the most decorated Marines of the entire Pacific War. The Japanese had built 12 reinforced concrete pillboxes in a half-moon arc across the southern peninsula, each one housing anywhere from 5 to 35 soldiers. Marine Command had promised a 4-day operation. It would take 70. On the landing alone, nearly 1,300 Marines had gone down on the beaches, and Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had thrown away the old suicidal Banzai playbook entirely. 10,000 defenders dug into caves and bunkers, connected by tunnels, waiting for the Americans to come to them instead. By September 18th, Jackson's own regiment had already bled 70% casualties. The pillboxes were the problem. 3 feet of poured concrete, overlapping fields of fire between neighbors, so that attacking one position got you cut down by 2 more. Grenades bounced off the walls. Rifle rounds sparked harmlessly against the concrete. Rushing the firing slits just piled bodies in front of them. Tanks couldn't manage the coral terrain. Artillery couldn't fire without killing the pinned Marines along with the Japanese. Jackson's platoon had covered 200 yards that morning before one large pillbox stalled the entire left flank cold. 3 men already dead trying to find a way around it. The platoon unable to advance or fall back. The math of crossing that ground was brutal. A man sprinting under fire covers roughly 15 yards a second. 150 yards of open coral meant 10 seconds fully exposed, and the Type 92 machine gun inside that bunker could put 75 rounds into a kill zone in that same window. And there were at least 2 of those guns waiting. Every officer, every sergeant, and Jackson himself understood exactly what that crossing meant. What Jackson also understood was simpler. Every minute his platoon stayed pinned, more men died, and waiting for someone else's solution was just a slower way of losing the same ground. If you want to see how Arthur Jackson's one-man assault on Peleliu turned out, hit that like button. It helps this story reach more people. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Jackson. He loaded a fresh 20-round magazine into his Browning automatic rifle, stuffed every pocket with grenades he could carry, looked at 150 yards of open coral standing between him and 35 Japanese soldiers, and stood up and ran. No order requested. No coordination with the platoon beside him. The bar weighed 19 pounds loaded, fired 30 caliber rounds at over 500 a minute, and was never meant to be accurate from the hip. Accuracy wasn't the point. Suppression was. The Japanese saw him instantly. Their guns swung toward the running Marine, bullets cracking past his head, coral exploding around his boots. Jackson fired back without breaking stride, sweeping the muzzle across the firing slit, not to hit anyone, but to force the gunners to duck for the handful of seconds he needed. 100 yards, 80. His first magazine ran dry. He dropped behind a boulder, reloaded, ran again through intensifying fire. 40 yards, 30, 20. At close range, the bunker's own geometry turned against it. The same narrow firing slits that gave the defenders such a wide kill zone at distance left a blind spot directly beside the aperture, and Jackson found it. He'd carried white phosphorus grenades for exactly this. Phosphorus burns at 5,000 degrees and ignites on contact with air. Water does nothing to stop it. He pulled the pin and shoved the first one through the slit. The screaming started immediately. Japanese soldiers stumbling out with their uniforms already burning, ammunition belts cooking off around their waists. Jackson shot them as they emerged, the BAR cutting them down before they could raise a weapon. 35 men still occupied that bunker, though, and phosphorus alone wouldn't finish the job. He grabbed a 40-pound charge of composition C2 plastic explosive another Marine had carried up behind him, shoved the entire package through the firing slit, and ran for a shell crater, with a 30-second fuse counting down behind him. He curled into the crater and covered his head as the blast lifted the pillbox clean off its foundation. Concrete, timber, and debris thrown 60 feet into the air. A chunk of concrete the size of a football landing inches from his skull. When the dust cleared, 35 Japanese soldiers were dead, and the pillbox was gone. 200 yards ahead, 11 more positions kept pouring fire into the Marine lines. The sane move was to fall back and report success. Jackson reloaded and started walking toward the next bunker instead. 3 days of watching the Japanese defensive network had taught him its blind spots, and he used that knowledge ruthlessly. The second pillbox fell to a rifle barrel jammed into its 4-inch ventilation shaft. 2 full magazines emptied straight down into the darkness below. The third and fourth sat close enough to cover each other completely, except for an 8-foot corridor between them, where neither bunker's guns could reach. Jackson sprinted that corridor at a dead run, reached the third position before its gunners could reposition, jammed the BAR into the firing slit and emptied it, then repeated the process on the fourth. 4 pillboxes down, 55 Japanese dead, 20 minutes of fighting, and his barrel had already gone hot enough to burn his hands through the wooden foregrip. The fifth bunker hid something new, a rear tunnel entrance camouflaged with coral and palm fronds, one the Japanese had learned to build specifically to counter American flanking tactics. A soldier came up out of the ground 5 yards behind Jackson with a bayonet fixed and lunged. Jackson spun and fired from the hip, dropping him back into his own tunnel, but the noise had given away the position to everyone still inside. He dropped to one knee and emptied a magazine straight into the tunnel mouth, the narrow passage channeling every round into anyone behind it. 3 more Japanese dead, 5th pillbox silent. The Japanese network still had radios, and Nakagawa's command post had already tracked 1 American systematically dismantling their southern perimeter. What Jackson could hear, without knowing any of that, was Marines advancing on his right. His own assault had broken the coordination that let 12 bunkers fight as one system. The 6th position sat on elevated coral with clear sight lines in every direction, no blind spot to exploit, until a Marine rifle squad appeared on his flank, and its sergeant, without a word exchanged, simply pointed at the bunker and led his men forward. Split attack, split attention. The defenders chose to fire on the larger group, and Jackson used the gap to reach the ventilation shaft and finish it with his last 20 rounds. Jackson was out of ammunition, and Nakagawa was already moving 40 reserve soldiers to seal the breach and kill the Marine who'd caused it. Jackson didn't know that yet. He was busy stripping ammunition from a dead Marine's Garand clips and hand-loading it round by round into his empty BAR magazines, gathering fragmentation grenades and anti-tank mines off Japanese bodies, working with 3 surviving Marines from the squad that had just helped him. The counterattack hit in 2 disciplined columns. No screaming charge this time. The squad's own BAR jammed on coral dust within 3 rounds, and Jackson stepped into the gap, firing controlled 5-round bursts, while 3 Garans added aimed fire beside him. 10 Japanese fell. 15. Still more came, until the coral ridge behind them erupted. 40 Marines from the 7th Regiment pushed through the very gaps Jackson had carved, closing from behind in a crossfire that ended the counterattack inside 3 minutes. 6 pillboxes remained, arranged in a mutually supporting triangle, the strongest position on the peninsula, roughly 30 defenders, no naval gunfire or air support available to soften it first. Jackson organized 43 Marines into 3 simultaneous assault groups with nothing but hand signals, took the center bunker himself, and led 12 men across 60 yards of open coral that cost 2 casualties in the first 3 seconds alone. He reached the wall, threw a captured grenade through the slit, silenced 1 gun, threw a second for the other, then climbed to the roof and finished it through the ventilation shaft. On his flanks, a satchel charge collapsed 1 bunker's roof entirely, while the third, protected by a reinforced rear-facing entrance, held out until Jackson sprinted across open ground under fire, took a bullet graze across his thigh without stopping, found its blind side, and dropped his last 2 grenades down its shaft. 3 pillboxes fell in under 4 minutes. Jackson was bleeding freely now, blood soaking through his dungarees, and a sergeant grabbed his arm to point him toward the aid station. Jackson pulled free. 3 bunkers left. He kept walking. The 10th pillbox fell to grenades dropped through its shaft. The 11th needed help. A Marine named Henderson brought up a satchel charge. Jackson placed himself, killing 7 more defenders. His leg had stopped fully responding by then, blood loss blurring his vision in the 100+ degree heat. But 3 Marines refused to let him take the final bunker alone. 1 carried extra grenades, 1 carried a flamethrower. Jackson took a BAR from the 3rd and laid down suppressive fire as the flamethrower operator closed to effective range, his wounded leg buckling under him as he dropped to one knee and kept the trigger down anyway. A 3-second burst of burning fuel poured through the final firing slit. The screaming lasted less than 10 seconds. At 09:33, the 12th and last pillbox went silent. Jackson collapsed against a coral boulder, his dungarees soaked through, his hands shaking, the BAR still hot across his lap. In roughly 90 minutes, he had destroyed 12 pillboxes and killed 50 Japanese soldiers single-handedly, breaking the entire southern defensive line and clearing the way for his platoon's advance. Navy corpsmen found him within minutes. The bullet through his thigh had missed bone and artery both, and he'd keep the leg. 3 days later, still limping, he was back in combat. Word of the assault reached division headquarters within days, then Admiral Nimitz's desk not long after. On October 5, 1945, more than a year later, the war already over, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around the neck of a 20-year-old Arthur Jackson in the White House and read the citation aloud. 12 pillboxes, 50 Japanese soldiers, conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, above and beyond the call of duty. Jackson went home to Portland, married, raised a family, and delivered mail for the Postal Service. Walking with a permanent limp his neighbors mostly never thought to ask about. He stayed in uniform through the Army Reserve and later the Marine Corps, rising to captain. And in September 1961, stationed at Guantanamo Bay during the height of Cold War tension with Cuba, he shot and killed a Cuban base worker named Ruben Sabariego, a man he believed was a communist informant, in what he maintained to the end of his life was self-defense. Jackson buried the body himself before reporting it. The Marine Corps denied his request for a court-martial to clear his name and forced him out of the service in 1962. The same man who had killed 50 men on Peleliu and received the nation's highest honor for it, now leaving in near silence over one death in Cuba that was never fully resolved in the public record. He kept serving in the Army Reserve until 1984, retiring a captain with 40 years of combined military service, and in later life began speaking openly at schools and veterans events about courage, fear, and the cost of survival. In 2011, at 86, he walked the deck of the USS Peleliu, a Navy assault ship named for the battle that made him a legend, and told more than 1,000 sailors and Marines about the men who never came home, then presented the ship's captain with his personal Medal of Honor flag, one of only 2 ever issued to him. He was, by then, the last living Medal of Honor recipient from that entire battle. Arthur Jackson died on June 14, 2017, in Boise, Idaho, at 92. Marine Corps body bearers carried him to burial with full military honors at the Idaho State Veterans Cemetery. 50 Japanese soldiers had tried to stop a 19-year-old Marine on a single September morning in 1944. Every one of them died. The Marine lived another 73 years, carrying both the medal and everything that came after it. If this story moved you the way it moved us, hit that like button. Everyone tells YouTube to put this story in front of more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing stories like this one out of the archive every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if anyone in your family served, we want to hear it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for making sure Arthur Jackson doesn't disappear into silence.